There is a list posted on a gymnasium wall in Wilmington, North Carolina, that changed the history of basketball forever. Most people will never see it. It is long gone, yellowed, and forgotten. But one boy stared at it for what felt like an eternity in the fall of 1978, scanning every single name, his eyes moving faster and faster down the paper, his heart hammering against his ribs. And when he reached the end of that list without finding his own name, something broke open inside him, something that would never fully close again. Before I tell you what that moment cost him and what it eventually gave the world, you need to understand the scale of what was at stake. Because the boy standing in that gymnasium hallway was not just any boy. He was Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And the list that didn't include his name was the Laney High School varsity basketball roster. The question you should be asking right now is not, how could they miss him? The question is, what happens to a person when the world tells them they are not enough, and they choose not to believe it? It was October 1978 at Emsley A. Laney High School in Wilmington, a mid-sized city on the coast of North Carolina. Michael Jordan was 15 years old, a sophomore, and basketball was not even supposed to be his primary sport. He had grown up as a baseball kid, a pitcher and center fielder, a boy who could throw a ball at a velocity that made older players stop and watch. Basketball had come to him later, organically, the way things that define you often do, not with a plan, but with a feeling. He had fallen in love with it the way you fall in love with something you are still learning, not yet knowing how deep that love would go. The tryouts for the Laney Bucks varsity squad drew roughly 50 boys to the gymnasium that week. There were 15 spots available. The team was coming off a solid playoff run the year before, which meant the returning seniors and juniors had an advantage that was nearly impossible to overcome. Michael was a sophomore, and in those days, sophomores simply did not make varsity. It was the unwritten rule of high school athletics in the South. You paid your dues, you developed, and if you were good enough, your junior year was when you arrived. Michael knew the rule, and he did not care. He had walked into that tryout believing, with the complete and irrational certainty of a 15-year-old who has never truly failed at anything he cared about, that he was good enough. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall. He still could not dunk. He was, by his own later admission, clumsy in ways he had not yet outgrown. His body was in one of those in-between stages where the talent inside him had not yet fully taken over the machinery of his limbs. He knew how to play the game. He just did not yet know how to play it at the highest level. Those are two different things, and the distance between them was the gymnasium wall with that list on it. When the coaches posted the roster, Michael walked up to read it the way everyone did, looking for his name first, the natural narcissism of hope. He did not find it on the varsity sheet. He checked again, then again. Then his eyes moved to the junior varsity list, where his name was, right where Coach Clifton Pop Herring had put it. And then, and this is the detail that carved the wound deeper than anything else, Michael saw the name of another sophomore on the varsity list, his friend, Leroy Smith. 6 feet 7, towering, the kind of height that solved problems in 1978 basketball that no amount of skill could fix. Herring had made an exception for Smith because the team needed size. He had not made the same exception for Michael. In Michael's mind, in the logic of a 15-year-old boy's heart, what this translated to was simple and devastating. My best friend was good enough, and I was not. He walked home without saying much to anyone. He went into his room and he cried. Not the quiet, dignified kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below your dignity, from the place where your real self lives before it learns how to hide. He cried the way you cry when you believe, even briefly, that you have been measured and found lacking. And in that room in Wilmington, something shifted. It was not the end of the story. It was, though no one knew it yet, the beginning of everything. His mother, Dolores Jordan, would later describe what happened next with a precision that borders on prophecy. She told him to go back to the gym and focus. She told him that if he was not getting what he wanted, there was only one thing to do: work until he was impossible to ignore. Michael Jordan took that advice and applied it with an intensity that even now seems almost alarming in a 15-year-old. He was in the gym before anyone else. He stayed after everyone left. He worked on his handles in his driveway until the skin on his palms was raw. He ran, he lifted, he grew, literally. Over the following summer, he added 4 inches to his frame, arriving at his junior year standing closer to 6'3", and the body that had been catching up to the talent inside it finally began to match what he had always believed himself to be. But here is where the story takes its first surprising turn. Because when Michael Jordan finally made the Laney varsity as a junior, the coach who put him on the squad and saw what was coming was none other than Pop Herring, the same man who had kept him off the team in the first place. Herring, who would later be criticized without mercy by fans and media who did not know the full context, recognized something rare in Michael's development. He began picking the boy up at 6 in the morning to take him to the gym for extra sessions. He worked with him personally, and Michael, who carried that original wound like a stone in his shoe, channeled it entirely into those sessions. His junior year, Michael Jordan averaged over 20 points per game for the Laney Bucks varsity squad and was instantly the best player on the team. His senior year, he averaged a near triple-double, 26 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists, and led Laney to a 19-4 record. He was named to the McDonald's All-American game, the most prestigious high school basketball honor in the country, and he earned a scholarship to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And still, the basketball world had not fully grasped what was being built in Wilmington. That would come later. It would come in layers, each one more dramatic than the last, each one involving someone telling Michael Jordan he was not quite enough, and Michael Jordan answering in the only language he ever truly trusted. The University of North Carolina in 1981 was not a program searching for relevance. Dean Smith had built one of the most respected coaching legacies in college basketball history, a program that produced NBA players with a consistency that bordered on manufacturing. When Michael Jordan arrived as a freshman, he was not the biggest recruit on the team. He was not the projected star. He was a highly regarded prospect among several highly regarded prospects, which in the world of elite college basketball meant he still had everything to prove. Dean Smith ran a team system, not a star showcase. Players who came in thinking they would light up scoreboards immediately discovered that at Chapel Hill, you earned your minutes, earned your role, earned your shots. For Michael, who had spent 2 years running an engine fueled by proving people wrong, this was simultaneously frustrating and perfect. The 1982 NCAA Championship game was played in New Orleans. North Carolina faced Georgetown, a team anchored by a freshman center named Patrick Ewing, who was already playing like a future Hall of Famer. The game was tight, the kind of college basketball that makes old coaches pace and young fans forget to breathe. With 17 seconds remaining, North Carolina trailed Georgetown by 1 point. Dean Smith called time and drew up a play. He looked around at his players, experienced seniors, proven upperclassmen, and then he gave the final shot to his freshmen. Michael Jordan caught the ball on the left wing, pulled up, and buried the jump shot that won North Carolina the national championship. He was 19 years old. He had just made the biggest shot in his program's history, and the coaching staff and his teammates had trusted him enough with the ball to give him the chance. After the game, something happened that Michael Jordan would carry with him for the rest of his career. A reporter asked Dean Smith about the play, about giving the ball to a freshman in that situation. Smith said what he believed, that Michael had earned it. But Jordan also heard the subtext, the part that wasn't said but floated in the air around every great player who has not yet arrived. You haven't done this yet. One shot in one game was not a legacy. One shot was a moment. And moments, Jordan understood more than most, had to be built into something permanent before they meant anything at all. He spent 2 more years at North Carolina, and those years mattered in ways that went beyond statistics. Playing under Dean Smith meant learning how to play the right way, how to make the extra pass, how to move without the ball, how to trust the system, even when the system sometimes asked you to hold back a brilliance that wanted to burst through every possession. Some players chafed under Smith's structure. Jordan absorbed it. He understood instinctively that the discipline he was developing would serve him later. In moments where individual will alone was not sufficient, he was learning how to be part of something, which is the thing that would eventually make his individual dominance sustainable over the length of a career. His sophomore season, 1982 to 1983, Jordan averaged 20 points per game and established himself as one of the elite players in college basketball. The comparisons began. People reaching for the names of players who played like this, who moved like this, who seemed to understand the geometry of the court at a level that suggested they were reading a different map than everyone else on the floor. By his junior year, he won the Naismith Award and the Wooden Award in the same season, college basketball's two most prestigious individual honors, and the conversation shifted from whether he was extraordinary to something simpler. Whether staying in college another year made any sense at all. He left after 3 seasons. He was ready. More than that, he had outgrown the space. Dean Smith knew it, Jordan knew it, and when he announced he was entering the draft, Smith supported the decision fully. The only question was where he would land. He led Team USA to a gold medal at the Los Angeles Olympics, averaging 17 points per game across 8 games. And players who watched him in those Olympic scrimmages went back to their teams and tried to explain what they had seen. Bobby Knight, the notoriously demanding coach who had never been accused of excessive praise, watched Michael in those Olympics and came away shaking his head. He watched Jordan dissect defenses with a fluency that made defensive schemes look like suggestions rather than constraints. Knight reached out to Portland Trail Blazers general manager Stu Inman, who was holding the 2nd overall pick in the upcoming NBA draft. Knight's message was simple and direct. Take Jordan. Whatever position you need, play him there. Jordan is the best player in this draft. Stu Inman listened politely. And then Portland took Sam Bowie. Here is where the story pivots in a direction that no one who lived through it will ever forget. The 1984 NBA Draft is the most scrutinized selection event in professional sports history, not because of what teams got right, but because of what one team got spectacularly wrong. The Portland Trail Blazers held the 2nd pick in the draft after the Houston Rockets, who had already locked in on Hakeem Olajuwon, then known as Akeem, a 7-foot center from Nigeria, whose talent was not in question by anyone. Portland needed size. They had Clyde Drexler, a young shooting guard with legitimate star potential, already on their roster. They had Jim Paxson at guard. What they needed was a dominant big man, and the best available big man besides Olajuwon was Sam Bowie, a 7'1" center out of Kentucky with a frame that made basketball coaches practically weep with gratitude. The problem was the legs. Bowie had missed 2 of the previous 3 college seasons with a broken left leg. The risk was visible to anyone who looked carefully. Portland looked anyway, ran their own medical evaluation, got a clearance they believed in, and took Bowie. The Chicago Bulls, picking 3rd, took Michael Jordan without hesitation and without apology. The Bulls front office knew what they had. General Manager Rod Thorne, in a moment of rare front office candor, said publicly that the Bulls felt almost guilty about their good fortune. Here was a player of immense talent falling to them because 2 teams in front of them had different needs. Chicago needed a star. Chicago got one. In that moment, in the draft room on June 19, 1984, the Portland Trail Blazers handed the Chicago Bulls something more valuable than a basketball player. They handed them a narrative. They handed Michael Jordan a permanent, living, breathing piece of motivation that he would access for the next 15 years. Because Michael Jordan never forgot where he was not chosen, the same way he never forgot the list on the gymnasium wall. The same way he never forgot the laughter at the All-Star Game freeze-out. The same way he never forgot every slight, every doubt, every moment someone told him, consciously or not, that someone else was more important. He checked into hotels under the name Leroy Smith. His old friend from Laney High, the boy who had made the varsity list that day and left Michael Jordan's name off it. Years later, when someone asked him why, Jordan smiled in that way he sometimes did when a question got close to something true. Leroy Smith, he said. That name never leaves you. Michael Jordan made his NBA debut on October 26, 1984, at Chicago Stadium, scoring 16 points. A month later, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated under the headline, "A Star is Born." By December, fans were voting him into the All-Star Game as a starter. He was 21 years old. He was already undeniably something different. He averaged 28 points per game in his rookie year, shot over 50% from the field, and dragged a Bulls team that had won just 27 games the year before, all the way to a 38-win season and their first playoff appearance in years. In those early months in Chicago, the city fell in love with him in the way cities fall in love with athletes who seem to carry something beyond skill, a quality of attention, of presence, that makes the mundane feel important and the important feel sacred. He played with his tongue out, a habit he had developed in childhood. Unconsciously, when his focus peaked, he wore red and black Air Jordans that Nike had designed specifically for him, shoes that violated the NBA's uniform policy so aggressively that the league fined him $5,000 every game he wore them. Nike paid every fine without complaint because they understood, as the league did not yet fully grasp, that the shoes and the fines and the controversy were not a problem. They were marketing. They were the beginning of something that would eventually make Michael Jordan not just the most recognizable athlete on earth, but a commercial entity unlike anything the world of sports had previously produced. The slam dunk contest at the 1985 All-Star Weekend gave the general public its first crystallized image of what Jordan could do when the specific architecture of a basketball game was set aside and pure expression was permitted. He ran from the opposite free throw line and elevated and stayed elevated, suspended in the moment between takeoff and landing for a duration that seemed to violate the terms of physics, and the arena erupted with the specific sound of collective witness, the sound of people realizing they are watching something they will describe for the rest of their lives. He lost the contest to Dominique Wilkins that year. He came back the following year and won it from the opposing free throw line. The ball cradled in one hand, the dunk clean and definitive, and followed by the kind of silence that means the crowd has temporarily forgotten to make noise. Both moments became iconic. Both became permanent. But then came the All-Star Game itself, and the story the freeze-out tells is as revealing about the NBA of that era as anything that happened on the court. Word filtered out before the game that several veteran players, reportedly led by Isaiah Thomas, had agreed to limit their passes to Jordan, to keep the ball out of his hands, to deny the rookie the stage and the highlights that the stage generated. The reasons were complex, a mixture of competitive protectiveness, territorial instinct, and the specific friction that arises when an older generation feels the ground shifting beneath their status. Jordan played the game, got few touches, and afterward said nothing publicly that was small or petty. He filed it away in the place where he kept everything, the place that had no drain, and then everything stopped. The second game of his second season, Michael Jordan came down from a routine drive and felt something wrong in his left foot. A hairline fracture, the doctors said. He would miss 64 games. The Bulls struggled through that season without him, and Michael sat in street clothes watching a team he knew he could transform, counting the days, managing the anxiety of enforced stillness, the way a caged animal manages the walls of its enclosure, by pretending, but never actually accepting. When the medical staff finally cleared him to return late in the year, the Bulls were barely clinging to a playoff spot. He came back, played, and did what he always did when the stakes were highest. He became more than the moment seemed to require. In Game 2 of the first round against the Boston Celtics, the 67-15 Boston Celtics, Larry Bird's greatest team, the team that many basketball historians still consider the finest assembled in the sport's history, Michael Jordan scored 63 points, in a loss, in a double overtime game that the Celtics won and that the Bulls eventually lost in a sweep. But 63 points, a number that had never been scored in a playoff game in the history of the NBA. A number so large that it seemed to exist outside the normal accounting of basketball reality. Larry Bird, who had seen everything by 1986, who had played through the rivalries and the battles and the transcendent moments that define a decade of dominance, walked out of that game and said the words that became the most eloquent description of Michael Jordan's early genius. I think he's God disguised as Michael Jordan. Not great, not exceptional, not the best I've seen, God disguised. But here is the thing about that quote that people tend to forget when they repeat it. It did not mean Jordan had arrived. It meant Jordan was alone. It meant that one man, no matter how godlike his individual performance, cannot beat a team by himself. The Celtics swept the Bulls. The following year, the Detroit Pistons swept the Bulls. And then, over the next 3 seasons, something began that would test Michael Jordan in ways that transcended basketball, that would ask something of him that box scores cannot measure. The Detroit Pistons of the late 1980s were a team built, consciously and deliberately, around a single tactical purpose: stopping Michael Jordan. They called it the Jordan Rules. Chuck Daly, the Pistons head coach, a meticulous and calculating basketball mind, had sat in the film room after watching Jordan score 59 points against his team on Easter Sunday 1988. He had also scored 61 against them the year before, a number that at the time was the highest ever recorded against the Pistons in a single game, and decided that conventional defense was futile. What Daly designed instead was a system of controlled violence. If Jordan was at the top, the Pistons forced him left. If he was on the wing, they doubled immediately. And if he drove to the basket, any time, for any reason, the nearest Piston put him on the floor, hard, every time, without apology. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, Dennis Rodman, Vinnie Johnson, Isaiah Thomas. This was not a basketball team in the conventional sense. It was a gauntlet with a scoreboard. The Pistons did not simply want to beat Jordan. They wanted to beat him in a way that would leave marks, that would make him question whether the path to the basket was worth the price at the end of it. They wanted him to feel every drive. They wanted him to hesitate just once, in that fraction of a second between the decision to attack and the moment of contact. A hesitation that small would have been enough. It never came. He kept driving. He kept getting knocked down. He kept getting up. And this, more than any individual performance, is the element of Jordan's story that deserves to be understood. He was knocked to the floor by the same team 4 years in a row, and he never stopped going to the basket. He just worked in the off-seasons. On making the floor cost them more: Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, Dennis Rodman, Vinnie Johnson, Isaiah Thomas. This was not a basketball team, it was a gauntlet, and Michael Jordan had to run it 4 consecutive playoff seasons. In 1988, the Pistons beat the Bulls 4-1 in the Eastern Conference semifinals. In 1989, they beat them 4-2 in the Eastern Conference finals. In 1990, they beat them 4-3 in the Eastern Conference finals, the Bulls coming as close as they ever had before falling short in the deciding game, Jordan scoring 31 of his team's 74 points in a loss that felt, in that moment, like it might define his career. He was 27 years old and the best individual player in the world, and he could not win the one thing that mattered. He sat on the bus after Game 7 of the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals, and he cried. His father, James Jordan, came onto the bus and sat with him. "It's just one game," his father said. "Come back next year." What happened that off-season is one of the most important stories in the history of athletic transformation. Michael Jordan looked at everything that had been done to him, examined it without flinching, and made a decision that separated him permanently from merely great players. He hired Tim Grover. He went into the weight room. He added 15 pounds of muscle to a frame that had been getting beaten up by the Pistons for 3 years and rebuilt himself into something the Jordan rules could no longer contain. He did not change his game. He changed his body. He changed the cost of fouling him. And then he waited. The 1991 Eastern Conference Finals between the Bulls and the Pistons was, by every analytical measure, a rematch. By every emotional measure, it was an execution. The Bulls swept Detroit in 4 games. Not close games, not nail-biters. They won each one by at least 8 points, methodical and remorseless, and in the final seconds of the last game, the Pistons walked off the court before the buzzer sounded, refusing to shake hands, refusing to acknowledge what had just happened to them. The walk-off became infamous, a moment of poor sportsmanship that defined how the bad boys' era ended, not with dignity, but with the kind of exit that only happens when a team knows in its bones that it has just been replaced. Jordan had shaken hands with the Pistons every year they had beaten him, every year. He never forgot that either. But now there was still the finals, and here is where the story delivers its most surprising pivot, the moment that reframes everything that came before it. because the Chicago Bulls' opponent in the 1991 NBA Finals was not just any team. It was the Los Angeles Lakers, the team of Magic Johnson and James Worthy, the defining dynasty of the 1980s, the Showtime squad that had won 5 championships in that decade and whose star had spent years quietly observing the young player from Chicago who seemed to be coming for everything they had built. Magic Johnson had seen Michael Jordan up close. He knew. They all knew. But the Lakers still had the experience, still had the championship pedigree, and the prevailing belief as the series began was that Jordan could not, cross this final threshold in his first finals appearance. The Lakers won Game 1, a tight game, 93-91, the kind of game that suggests the series will be long and physical and close. Jordan watched the film after that loss and said something to his teammates that night that captured everything about who he had become. They played their best, and we played terribly, and we almost won anyway. That is all we needed to know. The Bulls took Game 2 by 21 points. They won Game 3 in Los Angeles in overtime. They took Game 4. And then in Game 5, with the Lakers fighting for survival and the crowd at the Forum electric with the possibility that Showtime was not finished, Michael Jordan made a move that Magic Johnson later described as the exact moment he understood the torch was being passed. Jordan came up the right side of the lane, elevated, had his tongue out the way he always did in those suspended seconds above the rim, and then, mid-air, with the help of what seemed like a private negotiation with gravity, he switched the ball from his right hand to his left and laid it up and in. The Forum went quiet the way large spaces go quiet only when something extraordinary has just happened. Magic Johnson turned to his teammates on the bench and said, "That's it. It's his time now." The Bulls won the game. They won the series in 5. Michael Jordan wrapped his arms around the Larry O'Brien trophy in the locker room, and he cried. He cried the way he had cried in his bedroom in Wilmington in 1978, but this time the sound had a different quality, relief, pure and overwhelming, the release of 7 years of pressure that had been building since his first day in the league. Magic Johnson found him in the hallway between the locker rooms. Jordan saw him and put his arms out and pulled Magic close and just stood there crying. Magic held him and said something only the two of them know in full. What Magic later shared publicly was this: he was so happy that he had won, that he had busted through. That was a special moment for him and myself. Jordan would later tell the world what winning that first championship meant in the context of everything that had come before it. At last, he said, "I fit somewhere in the category of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. 7 years, 6 scoring titles in those 7 years, 3 times named the league's most valuable player before winning a ring, 3 times eliminated by the Pistons, 1 broken foot, 1 freeze-out at the All-Star game, 1 name missing from a gymnasium roster in 1978. All of it leading to that hallway in Los Angeles, where a 31-year-old man who had been told in 100 different ways that he was not quite enough finally held the one thing that said otherwise." And if you watch the footage of that moment, Jordan kneeling on the floor of the locker room, the trophy in his arms, the tears falling in a way that suggested they had been waiting 7 years for permission, you see something more than an athlete celebrating. You see the specific face of a person whose private conviction has finally been confirmed by public reality. You see the vindication of the room in Wilmington, where a 15-year-old boy cried and decided what kind of person he was going to be. But the story does not end in 1991. That is the thing about Michael Jordan that the list on the wall story sometimes obscures. He did not stop when he arrived. He did not relax into what he had built. He went back to Portland the following season, the same Portland that had passed on him 8 years earlier, and he took the Larry O'Brien trophy directly to them. The Bulls defeated the Trailblazers in the 1992 NBA Finals, 6 games, Jordan averaging 35 points per game in the clinching victory. He stood on the court afterward with the trophy again, and if any part of him thought about a draft room in 1984 and a general manager who chose a center, he did not say so in public. He did not need to. The scoreboard had already said it. 3 championships in 1991, 1992, and 1993, 3 Finals MVP awards, 5 regular season MVPs over the course of his Bulls career, 10 scoring titles, Defensive Player of the Year, 6 NBA championships total across 2 separate runs. The second three-peat coming after a retirement, a season of minor league baseball, a return, and then 3 more consecutive titles from 1996 to 1998. Each one its own complete story. Each one built on the architecture of that first rejection. The number is worth pausing on. 6 championships in 8 finals appearances, never losing a finals series. The Bulls never lost a finals, not once. In 7 attempts under Jordan, counting his returns in 1995 and the Washington years, he went to 6 finals and won all 6. That is not a career, that is a statement. A statement written over 2 decades, addressed to everyone who ever doubted, everyone who ever passed, everyone who ever laughed, everyone who ever kept his name off a list. Sam Bowi's NBA career lasted 10 years and was largely defined by the injuries everyone had worried about in 1984. He averaged 10 points and 7.5 rebounds per game, respectable numbers that would have been celebrated on almost any other player in any other context. He became a figure of perpetual retrospective sympathy, a man whose story was always told in relation to someone else's greatness, always defined by the draft room moment he did not control. He was not a bad player. He was just the player who was chosen instead of Michael Jordan, and in basketball history, there is no harder place to stand. In Portland, his tibia broke twice in 2 consecutive seasons, each fracture arriving with the kind of clinical cruelty that made the original optimism of the 1984 draft room feel almost naive in retrospect. He later found success in harness racing, a second career built on his own terms, away from the shadow. But the shadow never fully disappeared. It is the nature of that particular kind of proximity to greatness that it becomes the organizing fact of a person's legacy, whether they want it to be or not. Pop Herring, the Laney High School coach who sent a 15-year-old to the junior varsity and unknowingly struck the flint that started the fire, was invited to the unveiling of Michael Jordan's bronze statue outside the United Center in Chicago in 1994. The statue was enormous, Jordan frozen mid-flight, captured at the apex of what he had built from everything that had been denied him. 20,000 people were in the crowd. Jordan stood at the microphone and thanked his coach for believing in him, and then, in a moment that said everything about who Michael Jordan was, who he had always been, he turned to the crowd and reminded them that Pop Herring had been the first person to cut him from a team. The crowd roared. Herring, standing nearby, took it with the grace of a man who understood he was part of a story larger than himself. He smiled. He knew what his decision had produced. He had watched it the way everyone had watched it, with a particular mixture of pride and wonder, understanding that sometimes the worst thing you can do to someone extraordinary is make things easy. There is a question underneath all of this that I want to leave you with, because it is the question that makes Michael Jordan's story more than a sports story. It is the question that makes it the kind of story people are still telling 40 years later, still sharing with their children, still returning to when they need something that functions like armor. The question is this: what would have happened if his name had been on that list? What if Pop Herring had put Michael Jordan on the Laney Bucks varsity team in 1978 and Michael had arrived young, early, without the fire that the rejection built? What if Portland had taken him second in 1984, given him a team that was already built around Clyde Drexler, made his path to greatness smooth and unobstructed? What if the Pistons had never built the Jordan rules, had never forced him into the weight room, had never showed him the version of himself that could absorb punishment and keep coming? Would the championships have followed? Would the drive have been the same? Would there have been 6 rings, 6 finals MVPs, a bronze statue, and a hallway moment where the greatest player of one era put his arms around the greatest player of the era before, and both of them knew exactly what had just changed? There is no certain answer to that question. But here is what is certain. Michael Jordan, the actual Michael Jordan who exists in history, was built by the things that went wrong. He was built by the list that did not include his name, by the draft pick that chose someone else, by the Pistons who put him on the floor 3 years in a row, by the isolation of a player so talented that his teammates sometimes chose not to pass him the ball rather than share a moment they could not equal. He was built by being told he was not enough so many times that he developed an immunity to the idea, and then turned that immunity into the most ferocious competitive engine the sport has ever seen. And here is the part that the numbers and the championships and the statues cannot fully capture. This is not a story about basketball. It is a story about what you do with the lists that don't include your name. Everyone has a list. Everyone has a moment when the thing they wanted most was given to someone else, when they stood in a hallway and scanned for themselves and came up empty. What separates the people who become extraordinary is not that they felt nothing in that moment. It is that they went home, closed the door, cried in private, and then decided, not loudly, not in a speech, not with a press conference, but in the quiet interior where real decisions are made, that the list was wrong. And that they were going to spend everything they had proving it. Michael Jordan spent 45 years proving it. He is still proving it. Every time someone watches the 1991 finals and sees that switch from right hand to left mid-air, every time someone reads that Larry Bird said God was disguised in the body of a basketball player, every time a 15-year-old stands in a gym hallway and does not find their name on the list they expected to be on, the lesson is there. It does not require a narrator. It does not require a moral. It simply is. The list did not include his name. The draft took someone else. The Pistons put him on the floor, and he became the greatest basketball player who ever lived. If you have ever been told you are not good enough by a coach, a team, a company, a person, a moment, a closed door, then this story is yours. You are not watching Michael Jordan's story from the outside. You are watching a mirror. The humiliation is the same. The doubt is the same. The room you go home to and close the door in is the same. What you do in that room, what you decide in the silence after the door shuts, is the only question that matters. Michael Jordan answered that question on a junior varsity basketball court in North Carolina in 1978. He kept answering it for 25 years. He never stopped. Neither should you. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you of a list that didn't include your name, a door that closed before you could walk through it, a moment when the world told you no and you had to find a reason to believe in yourself anyway, leave a comment below. Tell us your version of the list on the gymnasium wall, because those stories deserve to be told, and the people who have lived them deserve to hear that they are not alone. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories like this one. Stories about the moments of rejection that became the foundation of greatness. Stories about the people the world underestimated, and what they built from that underestimation. We tell the stories the box scores leave out, the rooms that no one filmed, the decisions made in silence, the fires lit by the people who thought they were extinguishing something. Michael Jordan is not just the greatest basketball player who ever lived. He is proof that what tries to break you can, if you are willing to do the work, become the exact material from which you build everything else. The list on the gymnasium wall in Wilmington, North Carolina, in October 1978, did not include Michael Jordan's name. Everything that followed is the answer he gave. And the NBA, the world, everyone who ever doubted him, they learned the lesson. You cannot keep the right person off the right list forever. Eventually, the greatest players make their own.